Imperishable.
Imperishable.
A set of imperishable truths.
Impermanent.
Impermanent.
Single-story structures built from cheap and impermanent materials.
His philosophy stressed the impermanence of the world.
Impermeable.
Impermeable.
No paint is impermeable to water vapour.
Impermissible.
Impermissible.
Impersonal.
Impersonal.
Business letters do not have to be impersonal and formal.
Sometimes she seems a very impersonal, even unkind mother. I hate staying in hotels. They're so impersonal.
A formal and impersonal style of management.
Impersonate.
Impersonate.
Do you know it's a very serious offence to impersonate a police officer?
In the film, he amusingly impersonates a woman.
He's renowned for his Elvis impersonation.
Impersonator.
Impersonator.
A female impersonator.
Impertinent.
Impertinent.
He was always asking impertinent questions. You are an impertinent young woman.
Imperturbable.
Imperturbable.
Impervious.
Impervious.
His ego was impervious to self-doubt.
Impervious volcanic rock.
Materials that are impervious to water.
Impetigo.
Impetigo.
Impetuous.
Impetuous.
He was high-spirited and impetuous.
She might live to regret this impetuous decision. She might live to regret this impetuous decision. Impetus.
Impetus.
The report may provide further impetus for reform.
The discovery gave fresh impetus to the research.
Impiety.
Impiety.
Impinge.
Impinge.
Personal problems experienced by students may impinge on their work.
Impious.
Impious.
An impious crime.
Impish.
Impish.
A little girl with dark hair and an impish grin. Implacable.
Implacable.
Implacable enemies. The government faces implacable opposition on the issue of nuclear waste.
He remained implacably opposed to Stalin's regime.
Implant.
Implant.
A deep sense of patriotism had been implanted in him by his father. Surgeons successfully implanted an artificial hip.
A donor egg fertilized by her husband's sperm will be implanted in her womb. A donor egg fertilized by her husband's sperm will be implanted in her womb. A donor egg fertilized by her husband's sperm will be implanted in her womb. A donor egg fertilized by her husband's sperm will be implanted in her womb.
The fertilized egg implants and becomes a fetus.
Silicone breast implants. Silicone breast implants.
Implausible.
Implausible.
Margaret found his excuse somewhat implausible. Margaret found his excuse somewhat implausible.
It's not entirely implausible that a galaxy could be identical to our own.
Implement.
Implement.
We have decided to implement the committee's recommendations in full.
The implementation of the peace plan.
Implicate.
Implicate.
The allegations implicated Abe to such an extent he was forced to resign. The allegations implicated Abe to such an extent he was forced to resign.
3 police officers are implicated in the cover-up.
Viruses are known to be implicated in the development of some cancers. Viruses are known to be implicated in the development of some cancers.
Implication.
Implication.
What are the implications of these proposals?
This election has profound implications for the future of U.S. democracy.
His talk will examine the wider implications of the Internet revolution.
The implication of the former Chief of Staff in a major scandal.
They are called supertrams, the implication being that they are more advanced than earlier models.
The law bans organized protests and, by implication, any form of opposition. The law bans organized protests and, by implication, any form of opposition.
Implicit.
Implicit.
Her words contained an implicit threat.
His statement is being seen as implicit criticism of the work of research laboratories. His statement is being seen as implicit criticism of the work of research laboratories.
Confidentiality is implicit in your relationship with a counselor.
They had implicit faith in his powers.
They believed implicitly in their own superiority. They believed implicitly in their own superiority. Implode.
Implode.
The windows on both sides of the room had imploded.
Most nations learned their lesson during the 1930s when trade imploded and incomes plunged. Implore.
Implore.
Don't go, I implored her.
She implored the soldiers to save her child.
A ragged child with imploring eyes.
Imply.
Imply.
Cleo blushed. She had not meant to imply that he was lying. Cleo blushed. She had not meant to imply that he was lying.
An implied threat. The high level of radiation in the rocks implies that they are volcanic in origin.
Democracy implies a respect for individual liberties.
High profits do not necessarily imply efficiency.
Impolite.
Impolite.
An impolite remark.
Would it be impolite of me to ask exactly where you've been?
Impolitic.
Impolitic.
It was considered impolitic of him to spend too much time with the party radicals.
Imponderable.
Imponderable.
There are too many imponderables to make an accurate prediction.
An imponderable question.
Import. Import.
A ban on beef imports.
The abolition of import duties.
Cheap imports from Asia.
American demand for Japanese imports.
The import of electrical goods.
The beetle is thought to be a European import.
A matter of no great import.
In 2001, Britain exported more cars than it imported.
All the meat is imported from France.
The unusual designs were probably imported from Iran.
The US comedy format was gradually imported to UK screens.
You can now import graphics from other applications.
Imported autos.
Imported data.
Importance.
Importance.
The importance of regular exercise.
I agree about the importance of these proposals.
They make decisions about various matters of importance. They make decisions about various matters of importance.
He was full of his own importance.
Important.
Important.
A very important meeting.
The accident taught him an important lesson.
Happiness is more important than money.
What did you say? Oh, nothing important.
It's important to explain the procedure to the patient.
It's vitally important that you understand the danger.
It was important for the President to continue his schedule, regardless of the bomb threat.
Nothing could be more important to me than my family.
A very important customer.
They carry guns because it makes them feel important.
Importantly.
Importantly. Most importantly, you must keep a record of everything you do.
He strode importantly into the room.
Importation.
Importation.
Restrictions on the importation of American movies.
A law prohibiting the importation of tuna.
Importer.
Importer.
Importunate.
Importunate.
Importunate demands.
Importune.
Importune.
Importunate.
Importunate.
Importunate demands.
Importune.
Importune.
Impose.
Impose.
The court can impose a fine.
The government imposed a ban on the sale of ivory.
Parents who impose their own moral values on their children.
We could ask to stay the night, but I don't want to impose on them. We could ask to stay the night, but I don't want to impose on them. Military spending imposes a huge strain on the economy.
Imposing.
Imposing.
An imposing building.
He's a tall, quietly spoken, but imposing figure.
Imposition.
Imposition. The imposition of martial law.
I know it's an imposition, but could I use your bathroom? I know it's an imposition, but could I use your bathroom?
Impossible.
Impossible.
I want to speak to Mr. Franks. I'm afraid that's impossible.
It's impossible to be accurate about these things.
The noise made sleep impossible.
Members with young children often found it impossible to attend evening meetings. It is difficult to find work these days, but for blind people it is virtually impossible. It is difficult to find work these days, but for blind people it is virtually impossible.
He was faced with a seemingly impossible task. He was faced with a seemingly impossible task. It was physically impossible to get the fridge through the door. 6 months ago, peace seemed an impossible dream. Such mental attitudes are difficult, if not impossible, to change.
We were in an impossible situation. Whatever we decided to do would upset someone.
Helen's refusal to cooperate put me in an impossible position. Helen's refusal to cooperate put me in an impossible position.
His attitude is making life impossible for the rest of the team.
He was facing impossible odds.
Oh, you're just impossible.
Some sales managers think selling abroad is impossibly difficult.
100% airline security is a practical impossibility.
I just want to be able to buy healthy food at a reasonable price. Is that asking the impossible?
Imposter.
Imposter.
The nurse was soon discovered to be an imposter.
Impotent.
Impotent.
Emergency services seem impotent in the face of such a disaster.
Impotent rage.
Political impotence.
Impound.
Impound.
He sued the police after they impounded his car.
Impoverish.
Impoverish.
Falling coffee prices have impoverished many third-world economies.
Families impoverished by debt.
Fast-growing trees remove nutrients and impoverish the soil.
An impoverished student.
Spiritual impoverishment.
Impracticable.
Impracticable.
It was an appealing plan, but quite impracticable. Impractical.
Impractical.
The road toll scheme was dismissed as impractical. James was a foolish man full of impractical plans.
Sandra was hopelessly impractical around the house.
The sheer impracticality of collecting DNA from such a large population.
Imprecation.
Imprecation.
Imprecise.
Imprecise.
Vague, imprecise estimates.
Alcohol affects the brain, making speech slurred and imprecise.
An imprecision in the terminology.
Impregnable.
Impregnable.
An impregnable fortress. Her impregnable obstinacy.
Impregnate.
Impregnate.
The mats have to be impregnated with disinfectant.
Impresario.
Impresario.
Impress.
Impress.
Steve borrowed his dad's sports car to impress his girlfriend.
We were very impressed by the standard of work.
One candidate in particular impressed us with her knowledge. One candidate in particular impressed us with her knowledge.
I think the chief exec was favorably impressed by your presentation. I think the chief exec was favorably impressed by your presentation.
He's a lawyer. Mom looks suitably impressed.
Father impressed on me the value of hard work. Father impressed on me the value of hard work.
Patterns impressed in the clay.
Impression.
Impression.
When we looked around the school, we got a very good impression.
I got the impression that she wasn't very happy with her job.
What was your impression of Roger?
I'm sorry, I was under the impression that you were the manager.
Jean does a great impression of Madonna.
An artist's impression of the new building.
Some of the fallen trees had left a clear impression in the hardened mud.
Impressionable.
Impressionable.
The kids are at an impressionable age.
Impressionism.
Impressionism.
Impressionist.
Impressionist.
Impressionist painters.
Impressionistic.
Impressionistic.
The officers seemed to make only an impressionistic assessment.
Impressive.
Impressive.
The figures certainly look impressive.
Among the guests was an impressive array of authors and critics.
Production standards are impressively high.
Imprimatur.
Imprimatur.
His actions have the imprimatur of the Secretary of State.
Imprint.
Imprint.
The imprint of her hand on the soft sand.
One snowy morning, footprints and tire marks were imprinted in the snow.
The sight of Joe's dead body was imprinted on his mind forever.
Imprison.
Imprison.
The government imprisoned all opposition leaders.
She was imprisoned within his strong arms.
Many elderly people feel imprisoned in their own homes.
Imprisonment.
Imprisonment.
They were sentenced to 6 years imprisonment.
Life imprisonment. Improbable.
Improbable.
A film with an improbable plot.
It seems highly improbable that he had no knowledge of the affair.
Improbable combinations of colours.
Impromptu.
Impromptu.
The band gave an impromptu concert.
Improper.
Improper.
He realized that it was improper for a police officer to accept gifts. Allegations of improper banking practices. Allegations of improper banking practices. Improper sexual conduct.
It would be improper of me to comment before the election outcome is known.
If you are improperly dressed, you will not be admitted.
Improper fraction.
Improper fraction.
Impropriety.
Impropriety.
Accusations of impropriety were made against the company's directors.
Improv.
Improv.
Comedy improv.
Improve.
Improve.
A course for students wishing to improve their English. A course for students wishing to improve their English.
The doctors say she is improving.
You could use the money for improving your home.
Many wines improve with age.
Bertarelli has scored 165 points, and I don't think anyone will improve on that.
Improved.
Improved.
Improved performance.
Our washing powder now has a new improved formula.
Improvement.
Improvement.
There's been a big improvement in the children's behaviour.
An improvement on earlier models.
We need to carry out some improvements to the system.
Our results have shown some improvement this month.
Are you making some improvements to your home?
Improvident.
Improvident.
Improvise.
Improvise.
I forgot to bring my notes, so I had to improvise.
There were no nappies, so we had to improvise with what we could find. Annie improvised a sandpit for the children.
I just started playing and the other guys started improvising around me. An improvised sketch.
Imprudent.
Imprudent.
The banks made hundreds of imprudent loans in the 1970s.
Impudent.
Impudent.
He stared at me with a mixture of impudence and hostility.
Impugn.
Impugn.
I did not mean to impugn her professional abilities.
Impulse.
Impulse.
A sudden impulse to laugh. Margie's first impulse was to run. Jerry couldn't resist the impulse to kiss her.
On impulse, I picked up the phone and rang her.
Most beginners buy plants on impulse and then hope for the best.
The eye converts light signals to nerve impulses.
It is the passions which provide the main impulse of music.
Impulsion.
Impulsion.
Impulsive.
Impulsive.
Rosa was impulsive and sometimes regretted things she'd done.
In a burst of impulsive generosity, I offered to pay.
"Oh, Anne, I do love you," he said impulsively.
Impunity.
Impunity.
It's astonishing that these criminals are free to walk the streets with impunity.
Impure.
Impure.
Drug dealers selling impure heroin.
He tried without success to rid his mind of any impure thoughts about Julia.
Impurity.
Impurity.
All natural minerals contain impurities.
Our oatmeal face mask absorbs impurities from your skin.
Impute.
Impute.
The police were not guilty of the violence imputed to them.
In.
There's some sugar in the cupboard.
My mother was in the kitchen.
He took us for a drive in his new car.
I found her sitting up in bed. I found her sitting up in bed.
Manson spent 15 years in prison.
A hole in the ground.
Mr. Fisher is in Boston this week.
My parents live in New Zealand now.
I never went in pubs.
He almost drowned when he fell in the river.
You can put your pyjamas in the bottom drawer.
Get in the car.
She looked in her handbag, but her keys were not there.
A room furnished in the modern style.
Her parents always talk to her in German.
She shouted my name in a harsh voice.
A short note scribbled in pencil. The title was printed in capital letters. We waited in silence.
Shaw first visited Russia in 1927.
Bright yellow flowers appear in late summer. Bright yellow flowers appear in late summer.
He retired in October.
It was amazing how much we managed to do in a day.
The hardest decision I ever made in my life.
I'll be with you in a minute.
The results will be announced in 2 weeks' time.
I haven't enjoyed myself so much in years. It was the team's first win in 18 months.
You shouldn't believe everything you read in the newspapers.
Which actress starred in the film Cleopatra? There are a few mistakes in your essay. In his speech, Professor Leary praised the work of the volunteers.
There are 12 programs in the series. How many minutes are there in an hour?
Think of a word with 8 letters in it, meaning cold.
Owen will be playing in the England team tomorrow. Owen will be playing in the England team tomorrow.
A career in industry.
He's been in politics for 15 years.
Reforms in education.
He looked very handsome in his uniform.
She was dressed in a blue linen suit.
I hear that their marriage is in trouble.
The engine appears to be in good condition.
His life was in danger.
The castle now lies in ruins.
About 400 students took part in the protest.
His role in the negotiations.
I want you all to stand in a circle.
She slept curled up in a ball.
Can you walk in a straight line?
One in 10 homes now has cable TV.
Smokers have a 1 in 3 chance of dying from their habit.
Eggs are still sold in half dozens.
The children work in pairs. The children work in pairs.
People flocked in their thousands to greet their new princess. Income tax stands at 23 pence in the pound. Income tax stands at 23 pence in the pound. A hill with a gradient of 1 in 6.
Do you have the same pattern in blue?
A sculpture in white marble.
Milk is very rich in calcium.
Clark had become more extreme in his opinions.
An increase in fuel prices. The street is about a mile in length.
I've been standing in the rain for over an hour.
Would you prefer to sit in the shade? Would you prefer to sit in the shade? She looked at me in horror.
It was all done purely in fun.
You have a very good friend in Pat. In Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Republicans had found the ideal candidate. In Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Republicans had found the ideal candidate. There was a hint of spring in the air.
I don't think Freddie had it in him to be a killer.
She's everything I'd want in a wife. Vitamin D is found in butter.
A radio serial in 4 parts.
I tore the letter in 2 and threw the pieces in the fire.
In all the confusion, it is quite possible that some people got tickets without paying.
In my excitement, I forgot all about the message. In my excitement, I forgot all about the message.
In trying to protect the Queen, Howard had put his own life in danger.
I've been lucky in that I have never had to worry about money.
Matthews was already in his mid-40s.
Eric held the boat steady while the children got in.
He went to the ticket machine and put a coin in. He went to the ticket machine and put a coin in.
She dived in and swam out to the yacht. She dived in and swam out to the yacht.
Come in and sit down.
I'm afraid Mr. Stewart won't be in until tomorrow morning.
We're staying in this evening.
Our train's not in yet. Our train's not in yet.
When's her flight due in?
All entries must be in by next week.
Letters have been pouring in from all over the country. Have you handed your essay in yet?
Fill in your name and address on the form provided.
The information is typed in by trained keyboarders. The information is typed in by trained keyboarders.
Agassiz second serve was just in.
Labour recorded its highest vote ever, but the Tories got in again. The map had started to curl in at the edges. The tide was in, and the sea lapped against the harbour wall.
I'm afraid he's in for a bit of a disappointment.
If they find out what I've done, I'll be in for it, won't I? I think you ought to be in on this discussion, Ted. She's in with the theatrical crowd.
You have to be well in with the directors if you want to get promotion here. You have to be well in with the directors if you want to get promotion here.
Red is definitely the in colour this year.
Long skirts are in at the moment. I joined the club because it seemed the in thing to do. I joined the club because it seemed the in thing to do.
The book guides you through the ins and outs of choosing and growing garden flowers. The book guides you through the ins and outs of choosing and growing garden flowers.
The job is pretty boring, but it's an in to a career in publishing. The job is pretty boring, but it's an in to a career in publishing.
Inability.
Inability.
Alcoholism can result in an inability to cope.
The government's inability to enforce the ceasefire.
In absentia.
In absentia.
He was tried in absentia.
Inaccessible.
Inaccessible.
In winter, the villages are inaccessible by road.
A long flight of stairs made the centre inaccessible to disabled visitors.
Stockhausen's music is thought to be difficult and inaccessible. Stockhausen's music is thought to be difficult and inaccessible.
Inaccuracy.
Inaccuracy.
Jansen's review contained several inaccuracies.
As a journalist, you simply cannot tolerate inaccuracy.
Inaccurate.
Inaccurate.
A lot of what has been written about him is inaccurate.
He was fined $300,000 for making inaccurate statements to Congress.
Inaction.
Inaction.
Several newspapers have criticized the president for inaction.
Inactive.
Inactive.
The brain cells are inactive during sleep.
Young people are becoming politically inactive.
Graham's knee injury means he will be inactive for Sunday's game. Graham's knee injury means he will be inactive for Sunday's game.